Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avagnani.
bringing you this week's Living Ascension. So, continuing on the conversation from last week, because it was funny as after we got off, we're like, oh, well, yeah, then there's this whole aspect of this discussion. And then it was like, oh, well, there's next week's topic right there.
Right.
So last week we were talking about manipulation's place in consciousness and how we can see it as a great tool to remember to listen to our guidance, to remember to turn inside and really get to a place of, is this my truth? Is this, and that becomes as we were talking about the navigation versus the, being in the muck kind of thing. Good morning, Yasmin. So the continuation of that is in the experience that we've had on our consciousness path has been that one of the biggest triggers, good morning, Michael. One of the biggest triggers people have, many of us have, not people, all of us have, is
Right.
when we're called out on our own manipulations or we call somebody else out on their manipulation. Because most of the time, it's not a conscious thing. Like most of the time, because it's so embedded and ingrained in our cultures, as we're talking about how we use psychology to manipulate people and things like that, that when we call somebody out on it, right? And I'm not even saying in a obnoxious way, but just saying, hey, I don't need to do that just because you're telling me to do that or whatever.
Refusing to participate.
Yeah. That causes such a ripple effect because then it stops the perpetuation of the manipulation, right? So
Right. The word that kept coming to me when I was thinking about this all weekend is that there's hypocrisy in here where you behave one way, but internally you're another way. And it's like you don't make that continuity, and that is the manipulation of others. It's not really flowing how I saw it this weekend, but I'm sure it'll unfold as we go along. But it's almost like being called out on that hypocrisy.
yeah, right. Good morning, Nicole. Yes, I think I see what you're saying.
Right.
Well,
But it all has to do with being manipulating others from a place of, I'm not here, but I expect you to be here kind of thing.
well, right, because I judge myself for not being there.
Right.
Deep down, right?
Right.
And so what happens is this, and I tell people this, like in the whole journey of, Trinity energy progression as it's come around, as it's come and evolved and all that kind of stuff has been, practice itself is helping us all to recognize and remember and access infinite divine consciousness within ourselves.
Right.
Right. So what I have found, and this is, I'm bringing this up because it's a perfect example, because I've had so many examples of this happening, is, my goal as the originator of that practice has been to not have a hierarchy, not have the, guru on the pedestal, to not have, like just because I was the originator that I'm better than everybody else or anything else. And I have done everything to not do that in the practice. And yet others come in and then it's a natural expectation in practice,
Right.
where they start doing that.
Introducing that hierarchy.
And or trying to, right? And so I would just be like, yeah, nah, like, yeah, okay, no, like, but I can't stop them from doing, like, acting or
For themselves. Right.
Right. And in situations where somebody has been saying, yes, 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 I accept that I have all that. And this is the funniest thing is, one of the most challenging things I have and I've had in this practice has been when I tell people, not that they're like lowly and can't do something, is that I say, you are infinitely capable yourself.
Right.
and they say, well, what do you get on this? Well, so here's like subtle manipulation, right? Because then you talk and they, buddy up, and then it's, well, what do you get with that? And it's like, I trained myself from the beginning. No, that's not what I practice. It's like, I'd be like, well, no, what do you get from that? Right.
Right. Right.
And push it back on them. Well, then the most angry I've gotten people is when they've said they were, along for the ride on that, but they really weren't. And they were trying to manipulate me to be a certain person for them, be a certain ideal for them, be or whatever. And because I refused to do that and would call them out on it, like in a way that I would just like, yeah, no, that would truly anger them, infuriate them to a place that they would walk away from me, the practice and everything else. And it's like, well, because I sort of called them out on that manipulation. Right.
Right. Right.
And that's really intrinsic in all of spiritual practices.
It is. And it, to me, when I hear you say that, I sit there and say that sometimes we have an expectation of this. I need this person to fit in this box for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to create behavior that encourages them in an almost sometimes forceful manner to fit into this box for me. Mm-hmm. Because that makes me feel safe. That makes me feel comfortable with who I am. That makes me believe that that all the things I believe about myself are true. Right.
Well, and I can still deny the other things that I don't want to see.
Well, if I believe I'm limited, if I believe that I'm less than, then by that person's behavior following this pattern, it reinforces that for me.
Right. Right. Michael says hierarchy, obstacles, challenges, excuses my ego while it's on a high. Right. 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 And, the thing is, when I had a really big thing that came in while you're talking, making your last point. Now I forgot it. It's already flown right out. So I'll just have to keep on letting it come back.
Yep.
But, the key of looking at all of this is it's like, okay, when we truly, so going back to the core of everything Sarah and I have talked about for years is when we truly are doing our self-work, right?
Exactly.
When we're truly doing our self-work, we are completely aware, or not completely, we do as much self-awareness as possible of where we are at that moment, right? When we're committed to the self-work, we're committed to looking at, why am I unhappy that this person didn't act this way?
Right. And why am I triggered? Why am I triggered? Or why am I uncomfortable or upset? Right. I mean, even if it's mildly as like, that just irritated me.
Right. Right. With our spouses, with our kids, with our families, with our friends. With our pets, they just wouldn't do this, even if it has nothing to do with you. Right.
Right. Right.
And this is the whole thing, is like, how many times we get pulled into situations that really have nothing to do with us, just because we're a bystander or somebody close to that individual or whatever, and they pull you into their drama. And then, what do? They start asking your counsel. They start asking, and then you start telling them what they should do, right? Which is where the ego just slips right in.
Or my favorite is, well, if I were you.
Right. Right.
Because that's not telling them what to do.
Right. Right. Well, and that's actually better than saying you should do this,
Right. Right.
And actually even better than if I were you is, if it were me, this is what I would do. But that's my choice. Right. And I've said that, because people have asked, well, I'd be like, well, if it were me, this is what I would do, but that's me, but this isn't you, like, it's your journey.
Right.
More times than not, if I catch myself thinking that, I'll be like, well, really, it doesn't matter what I would do. It's not my journey.
Right. Because you're in that instance separate.
Yes. So there is this really tricky thing of triggers having to do with manipulation or not being able to manipulate a situation, right, to your liking. And it's interesting because that's a very, very fine line between intentional creation and manipulation, right?
Right. Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so when we intentionally create, so here's the big difference, what's like sort of yelling at me right now is when we do intentional creation, we basically say, this is how I see it being allowed into my reality, right? And that's manifesting. That's like the most powerful way of manifesting is to see it, feel it, taste it, know it already
Embodiment.
exists. Yeah, know it already exists and know I'm worthy of it. Know I can allow it, right? Okay, so, and I can take steps and pretend it's already here, right? That's all about masterful creation. When we start manipulating, like, so here's the thing, we are masters at, I want to control how it comes in.
Right. I want to manage from point A to point B. I don't want
Right,
to just keep point B in mind.
right.
I want to manage all the steps because this serves me on a
Yeah.
different level.
Yes. And so then that's when we go, okay, I am just going to like, yeah, that's the whole thing. It's like when we start having to control, saying, okay, let me think of a good example. There are so many times when we say, oh, well, I'll do this when this happens, right? Like, and that's a
Right.
control, that's a manipulation,
Right.
right? I will, because then like it's that whole like, oh, I'll be happy when I lose
That's
this
what I was
weight.
thinking.
I'll be happy when I make this money. I'll be happy when this, I'll be happy when that. And it's like you're daring the universe. You're daring and that's a manipulation. Like we don't realize that's a manipulation, like an effort at manipulation, right? Well, I'll only do this. How many times have you said, well, I'll do this if you do that? That's a manipulation.
Right.
And
Right.
you can exchange the word manipulation to expectation, right?
Right.
And managing, that's another manipulation as well, to say, oh, well, that's all the intentional creation. Oh, well, I see myself doing this, but I'm going to only do this when this happens because that's my bargain with the universe. Like because then I will be the one in control, right? And see, even when I say that, my ego's like, ugh, why are you calling
Well,
me out on that?
you whether it's a storyline on something you're watching on television, or whether it's a real life situation where someone's in desperation and they make a deal
Right.
with
Deal
their
with the devil, right?
deal with
Oh,
the devil, or deal with the energy they deem as the higher source, whether it's God, whether it's the universe, whether
a
it's Allah,
genie
right,
or yeah,
right,
yeah.
whomever, and to say, if you'll do this, I'll do this. Like if you'll make this person better, or if you'll let this person come through this tragedy unscathed, then I will be a better person, or I will go to church, or I will do this. And I mean, it's that manipulation in there, like this for that. It's like a deal, just like you said.
Yeah.
And that is manipulation.
Yes. And so this is funny. So when we start looking at all this and start unpacking it all, it's like, oh, wow. There's so much. So the biggest part is what happens when we get anxiety, right? Well, we get anxiety because we can't control, right? If we can't control or feel like we're out of control, or, we feel like we need to control or manipulate a situation, right? So we get
Right, right,
anxiety, we get fear, we get anger. So these are big triggers. And then we have to stop and look and say, what's this about? Like,
right,
why do I care? So yeah, others will do that to you. So here's the funny thing. That's what that whole statement means. When we talk about, it's none of your business what other people think of you, because what they think of you is where they are. It has nothing to do with you, where you are, right? And
right,
so if they are triggered by something you did, it's something in their consciousness that they are upset about, right? And so if you go through a situation and you're sort of calling them out on, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, why would I do that? And this is a big one in close relationships, a big one in like spousal relationships and parent and child relationships. Oh my gosh, we were talking about that last
Siblings.
week. And siblings, right? Yes. Yes. Well, yeah. And I'm just thinking about how many times it's happened. And like, you go, why do you think in your mind, you're thinking, oh, well, it's family, I'll just tolerate it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other
Right.
person knows they can manipulate you because you have that consideration, right? Or that belief or whatever. We do that all the time because we know somebody has, oh, well, this person believes they have to do this, so I can manipulate them. And we don't think this consciously. This is like an automatic thing. How can I get, here's the thought. How can I get them to do this for me?
Right. Or how can I get them to participate in me achieving this feeling that I'm seeking?
Right. Whatever that goal or whatever is. Yes.
Right.
And we're not saying the word manipulation actually as a negative thing. It's just sort of calling it out for what it is.
Right. It's taking the judgment out of it.
Yeah. And it's saying, okay, so how is that here to serve me? And if I am triggered by somebody not doing what I want them to do, right? And I had that come up, of course, because we were talking about this week, right? It's like, wow, why don't I trust?
Right.
Why don't I trust? And this is and I'll tell you, this is the most challenging thing as a business owner, right?
Right.
Because we're like, oh, well, we need to have this many clients at this much money to make this, to do the math and to have this kind of income. And then, oh, well, I have to get people to get my stuff, to buy my stuff, right?
Right.
That's manipulation of sorts, right? I mean, that's marketing, as we were talking about last week. But the thing is funny when you get triggered by, oh, it's not working, they're not listening, it's like all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, but maybe you've forgotten the end, like what is you're doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it from here? Are you doing it from here? And that ties back into the living from the heart versus living from the head that we were talking about pre-manipulation discussion.
Right. Well, our entire economy is based on, I believe initially it was based on needs, food, clothing, shelter, all those basics.
Mhm.
And in order to broaden offerings, it was like we had to identify new needs to instill in someone to broaden what they spend their resources on, whether it's their time, and honestly, it just boils down to money from that perspective. But from the individual perspective, it really is deeper than that. And I think that that's where marketing goes for, is I just want to be loved. And in order to be loved, I believe I have to be thin, rich, pretty, handsome, physically fit, the best parent, the best child, the best sibling, all these.
And what that is also dictated by what other people think too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or what you believe they think.
Right. Because when we put so much weight on what other people think, which then manipulates us. Right? Think about that.
Right. Which, if you go back to guidance, it's like, is this something that is for me? Take out the word need, take out the word lack. Just, is this for me?
And is this for me right now? Because it might not be for me tomorrow.
Right.
Or might not have been for me yesterday. So how many times I've done stuff where I'm like, okay, and I had guidance like a week ago of no, right? That suddenly it was like, yeah, now's the time,
Right.
So we don't ask once, we ask continuously, especially if we feel a pull. But the key with this whole manipulation thing is to just recognize it for what it is. And it's this idea of controlling a situation and getting to a certain place, right?
Right.
Most of the time when I've had the best results in things in my life have been when I've completely let go and just trusted and just been the best of me in that moment and
Right,
whatever I
right.
was guided, and not worried about the other stuff.
Right. And for me, the key in all of this has been losing the judgment of the whole situation, to come to a place where I don't feel manipulated, because immediately that makes me want to bite back or fight back or, rebuff the whole circumstance. But there's something there for me, or it wouldn't be here. So in
Right.
order to get to that understanding and that realization, I have to lose my judgment of this is bad, or this makes me mad, or, this upsets me, this triggers me. The value is, once again, coming to that present moment of, why is this here for me? What's the message in this? I mean, we
Right.
can tie so much of what we've talked about into everything we talk about these days.
It's also interrelated, right? Right. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of unpacking with this, and it's simply shifting. Like, a lot of this has to do with, we did a series of our podcast, oh, I don't know, a year ago, sometime in the not too distant past, about well, crap, now I just totally lost that train of thought. Wow, I just can't stay focused today, this morning. I think I'm already out there, whatever we're doing. To do with, yeah. What did you do? What was your last thing that you just said?
Talking about, oh gosh, now I've lost what I was even talking about. Oh, judgment, losing the judgment.
Using the judgment and how to do with that. No, I can't even remember what it was.
And stepping back and saying, what's here for me right now. And if I lose the judgment, it's like calming the storm, or the ocean, or the tides, or whatever, to let the water settle and say, what's the message for me in this?
Mhm.
I've created this for a specific set of circumstances. Let me see that now.
Right. Right. And the biggest step is really being able to see that within ourselves.
Right.
And to let go of, because here's the thing, another form of manipulation is when we do call somebody out, or whatever situation out, for its effort at controlling us in some way, shape, or form, and then it incenses the other individual, group, or whatever, because sometimes it's a group, sometimes it's a family, right? Sometimes your
Right.
family is trying to get you to do something, because that's the way they've always done it. Wow, we have so many things out in the ether, so many family agreements, right? About, oh, you'll
Right.
learn lessons this way, that we can break. And then we have this guilt about breaking them, right? Because
Right.
not following with the family's going. But you know what? That's part of what we're talking about next week. But you still have to wait.
Right. I was getting ready to say, this sounds vaguely familiar.
Sounds vaguely familiar. Just like, wow, that's just leading right into our next week topic. So anyway, but there's so much about, like, when we have others that are trying to, so like when, say, you anger your family, how many times have we said, oh, I'm just going to do this because it'll make everybody happy,
Keep the peace.
to keep the peace.
Right.
Right. And you know what? As conscious as I am of all of it, I still fall into it sometimes. Right.
Right. Well, it seems in the moment to be the lesser of the two evils.
Right. Well, the less of the energies, right, to have to navigate.
Right. Right. It's just easier if I just go ahead and do this.
But isn't that that's a manipulation in itself, though, right? Because then it's like, well, the pressure then gets put so onto you for you to think that it's easier. And it never is. In all honesty, it never is. Because you end up having to then, manage things all in a different way around that, like what you're doing to make somebody else happy, or.
Well, and that goes down a whole nother rabbit hole, because then you're sacrificing yourself for others. And then that at the same time reinforces to those others that you won't honor yourself. So it's essentially saying, yeah, treat me this way.
Yes. And we have all that. That has to do with worthiness, right? That's the core, which we have an entire course on. You know, we always have to come back to the courses at some point.
Right. Which all leads up to the self-love, which is
Right.
what we're really talking about.
Right. Which all of it's related.
Which is another course.
So the thing is, it can be overwhelming, because when you start looking at everything this way and we start unpacking it, it's like, oh, well, that's a manipulation, that's manipulation, that's manipulation, that's manipulation. And instead of saying, judging it and saying that's manipulation, it's really, instead, is really getting to the place of stepping back and saying, is this for me to do or be right now? That's it. If
Right.
you learn that, if we learn that and we learn to trust our guidance is course number 2
I thought it was 3.
in Wonderland. Well, it's one of our,
2 or 3.
one of them. If you learn to truly trust your guidance, right? And it's so funny because all of us do it, no matter how versed we are at consciousness, at our guidance and stuff, we still have the ego step in and slip in and say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. When you think in your mind that
Right.
doesn't make sense, guess what? That is another ego thing that's just
Right. Well,
So
and guidance follows so easily hand in hand with knowing yourself.
Mhm.
And the more you nourish yourself, the more you come to know what is for you.
Right.
Because
And
you've been nourishing. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's the alignment of what you were talking about before, what's in you and what's
Exactly.
out of you. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
that is when we have to manipulate, because most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it's because we're trying to manipulate our outside.
We're manipulating our external versus manipulating our internal, because we feel that if we can manipulate the external, then that will satisfy the need we've identified internally.
Instead of just addressing the internal without all the energy put into externally,
Because it will become reflected in the external once the internal takes place. It doesn't work vice versa.
Yeah. So there's a lot of unpacking here on this. This is like probably a year's worth of, courses right here. We just talked about
right. Well, because it's so multifaceted and so complex. We've created it so intricately.
Yes.
It's like a 5D spider web where everything's connected.
Holographic, right? The holographic spider web. And
Right.
it's a retraining. Like, this is why we talk about these topics every week, because these are little things that we see in patterns, because we know to look for them now, right? Because we've been doing this for so long, and that one thing does lead to another. And if, it's funny that I find when I take a step back sometimes, and you and I are pretty much on here every week doing this, right? But say, like, on the weeks that we choose, we take a week off, right?
Right.
I find that it's harder for me to come back after taking a week off than it is just doing it weekly, because it's like you get out of the practice of looking and observing consciously, because it becomes like, oh, I'll look at that later. I'll look at that later. And the longer we do
that autopilot that we tend to stay on.
Yes.
And that's just staying in the ruts
Yeah.
of what we've created.
Right. So, it's, these things are so important to look at, because we start unpacking all the stuff inside of us that is still holding us back. Right. And the more, I was saying this on a little video blurb I did this past week, which is, the more advanced we get in our consciousness management, the more advanced our ego gets at being very slick and sly on slipping itself in there.
Right.
because it goes, oh, well, you've mastered all those basic things and foiled myself. So now I have to hide these things because I really judge them and don't want to look at them. And I'm like resisting this. I'm going to dig it in deeper and I'm going to have to manipulate this more. So we're manipulating ourselves.
Right. I have to up my game,
Yes.
says the ego.
Yes. So triggers about how somebody else is acting, especially when it has to do with how you feel about a situation, or like if you're trying to get them to do a certain thing, like, I always tell people one of the biggest things, and that's actually an exercise we have in the Trinity practice, which is in the self mastery practice, which is, why do I care?
Right. The
I
why.
ask ourselves, why do I care? Why do I care if this person does this? Why do I care in this
Why
situation?
is this important to me?
Yeah. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, so that's a manipulation itself, right? So here's an example I give a lot, right? Because it's like a spousal situation happens all the time, right? You're mad at your spouse because they won't do this.
Right.
And the thing to ask you is why do you care? Right? Well, because, and sometimes you go, well, if they did this, if they cared enough, right? Or they cared enough about me, or they respected me enough, or blah, 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 they would do this. That's manipulation in our
Right.
minds, right? And then I'm like, well, why do you care? Why do you care if they do it or not? Right? Because at the end of the day, when you dig down underneath it, you get down. We always talk about getting to the self-responsibility statement, which is another course in our Wonderland program.
That's right.
But the self-responsibility statement is, when this happens, I feel like this. I feel like this when this happens. Right. Which then takes full self-responsibility of the only reason I'm triggered by this person not doing what I want them to do, or what not doing this way, is because it allows me to really continue to feel unworthy, like I'm not, like because I don't believe that of myself automatically. Because if I believe that of myself automatically, that goes back to self-love, course number 7 in Wonderland.
Right. Well, and to get all the way from that self-responsibility back to that self-love, you've got to have that forgiveness in there, which brings it all the way back around from all the way back to having gratitude for the opportunity to participate in this set of energies.
Right. And when you finally get to that place of saying, when I love myself first, number one, when I get to that place of recognizing I am the divine, I am infinitely capable. I trust that. I let my expanded self give guidance to this self, and all through those 7 elements, right? I don't need somebody else to tell me what I am or not, or to prove to me what I am or not, or to approve of me at all, or to, it's really funny because there was a conversation I was having over the weekend about, it's funny what we do, even when our kids are adults, right? It's funny what we do for them to look kindly on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look to you as the, and we do, parents all the time. They hold themselves to certain standards. So blah, blah, blah. Like how many times people talk about, and how many people and clients have come to me and they're like, well, I have to have this much money in the bank, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why?
Right.
Because that's what somebody else told you were supposed to look like, or is that really where you are? Or at the, and I say, well, okay, so say you have this much money in the bank and our entire financial institution collapses because, we're right on the verge of that.
Right. So it's all zeros and ones. You really actually have nothing.
Exactly. I'm like, so what happens when that happens? And then you spend all this time and energy manipulating your entire reality around having this much money in the bank.
Right.
Or in whatever, in assets. And then it doesn't matter. Like, look at how many times over the years we've had real estate crashes, and look at right now we're in the real estate, bubble. And it's like, well, what often happens after the bubbles, just saying, but, and it's like, and we put so much of our own self-value on what this is worth, and all this kind of stuff. And that's all manipulation. And then we don't realize how we're manipulated into having certain kind of lifestyles, having certain kind of houses, having certain kind of cars, having certain kind of bills, because that's what we do. because that's what
Right.
you do to be this kind of person, to be valued in society, to do like, and it's just so funny. Like when you start pulling it all apart, you're like, wow, when do I get to just be me?
Right. Right.
When do I get to just do me? What is, and many of us don't even know what me is, because that's what a lot of us are going through this. I don't want to call it a self-identity crisis, but we are. A lot of us are coming to this realization in our consciousness journey and saying, well, what does me really look like when I take all of these externalized factors and
Right.
manipulations away?
And what does this me like?
Yeah.
Love. I mean, it's that stripping away and getting down to the new basics.
Right. And I know, I mean, because both of us have been talking about that a lot over the past year, and like, or a couple of years now, I think, and coming to that realization of, wow, well, I was doing that for this. I was doing that for this. Right.
Right.
I was doing that for approval. I was doing that for, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, okay, when I take all that away and say, I don't need to get anybody's approval except my own, right, of what feels natural and easy and passionate for me, then what does that look like? And when you quiet all of those chitter chatter voices that are saying, well, all those, and that's what they are manipulations. That's all through duality. It's all the experiences that we've created in this complexity, which is, again, with no judgment, but it's like to come back to the core of our power and our consciousness, is to come back to what it looks like without those manipulations, what it looks like when it comes into a purer form. So that's why we wanted to do a part 2 on this, about how do you navigate when you're triggered, right? When somebody calls you out on yours, or when somebody else is triggered. So going back to, it's none of your business what other people, what other people think about you, because it's their journey. If they get triggered by you being in your truth and saying,
Right.
like, no, I'm not going to do this, you can't do anything about it. This was a thing, and here's an example. In my family, there has been this historical thing, and I'll tell you, many families will do have the same thing, right? And it was like this thing I grew up with, where it was like somebody would ask somebody would want somebody else to do something for them, right?
Mhm.
And instead of just asking them straight out, hey, could you do this for me? They would beat around the bush. They would, talk about what a hassle something was.
Right.
They would make all kinds of drama around it, but they never just asked the question, hey, could you help me with this?
Right.
And and then it caused so much angst in my family, so much passive aggressiveness, because then it would be like, oh, well, why didn't she do this for me? Or why didn't he do this for me? Well, you never asked, because they didn't tune into your manipulation of getting them
Right.
to, because for some reason in their minds, it was better for somebody to offer help than to ask,
than to
right,
have to ask for it. Right.
because that's a pride thing or whatever, right?
Or if you really loved me, I wouldn't have to ask for this. You would just
Right.
step up and do it. You would recognize the need and step up and do it.
Right. Which is crazy, because we have so many things in our lives, right? So I have, over the years, and it's funny because others in my family have gotten retrained in their interactions with me, because I grew up and I left because I was like, I'm not doing this. And I would tell them straight out, if you want something from me, ask me for it. If you expect something, can you just tell me straight out? I don't want to guess. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste my energy trying to guess what you want and then not making you happy anyway, because it's not exactly what you wanted anyhow. If you want something, ask me for it. And, it took me a while, and it angered them. So this is what I'm talking about, calling people out on the manipulation. Like, that's what I did. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. So you can be angry with me all you want, because you never asked me to do this for you, but you put all this stuff around there, right?
So Michael says manipulation is just a method we use to be fulfilled in some way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
pretty much. And so, yeah, so the whole thing is funny, because you know, my mother, and that my mother is of that thing too. And it's like, but she's learned, it's like, if you want something, you need to ask.
Right.
And
Right.
99 times out of 100, when you ask me directly, can you do this for me? I'm like, okay.
Right. Well, and then I find myself in circumstances where someone will text me and ask me a question about something that I don't know off the top of my head, but I would have to Google it or I would have to do some research. And I immediately want to just jump right in and do that and answer the question. But actually, I have stopped myself because that fulfills a need in me. Oh, they need me. I'm an expert.
Right.
I'm needed.
Right.
And I've stopped myself and said, well, I don't know. I can Google it for you, or you can Google it for yourself.
Right.
And it's amazing how much more free time I have.
Right. 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 And you know, it's funny because like I too have done that, right? And Michael just said something. So
No,
Nicole,
Nicole said, I've
I-
had to apply that same lesson, Angela. Just ask. I'm not going to read your mind. LOL.
yeah. And it's like, and it's not that I can't, it's that I'm not going to spend my energy like trying to figure out
Right.
what you want, because more times than not, it's really well, it has nothing to do with me anyway, right? So it's
Right.
like, I'm not going to spend my time trying to figure out your stuff because I'm spending my time figuring out my stuff, right?
Right. Right.
So
I'm not going to be drawn into yours where I don't belong.
yeah, but you're right. And going back to the Google thing, I laugh because I do the same thing, and I was doing the same exact thing. Now it's funny because my husband, he has taken a different vein, and like usually, like we always have Google fights, like who can find it first, right?
Right.
But he'll be like, in all reality, he's like, you actually find the best keywords somehow, you always put it in the right way and get the right thing. And yeah, that could be a manipulation, right? Just to get me to do it, right?
Right.
But stroke my ego a little bit. But yes, and these are little things that I've done that so many times too now. Like that's what I do too. Is like, you know, I don't know off the top of my head, but all I would do is Google it. So why don't you just go Google it?
Right. Right. Exactly. And I've sat and envisioned how much time I've bought myself by just suggesting that versus providing an answer that I've found on the internet, then to be questioned. Well, what about this? Well, why is this? And then having to go back and do more research to
Right.
defend what I found. And it's like, I didn't even want to know the answer in the first place.
Right. It was not something I was interested in to begin with. Right.
Right. Right.
So, so these
And
are
I've tried to be more respectful of others when I have questions or would like input by saying, this is what I think. Can you add something to that? Or do you have a different perspective that you could share with me?
right.
Which then gets it back down to really what I'm looking for.
Mhm.
So I've tried to apply that same thing to when I am looking for something from someone else.
Right. And it's being honest and direct, like going back to like my whole thing about just ask, right?
Right.
I had people angry with me and my family because I had no idea they wanted something from me. And so, you know, but I didn't waste my energy on worrying about them being angry with me because I'm like, I'm not going to spend my time trying to read your mind. I'm not going to spend my time like trying to, like you're saying, getting pulled into your thing.
Right.
And these are simple things that we don't realize. Like you're saying, you don't realize how much more time you have because you're not doing that anymore, right? And it's like, you know, we don't realize how much time and energy we put into that, allowing others to manipulate us.
Well, and sometimes it's like, oh, this is a great rabbit hole to go down. And then you realize how much time you've lost after, you know, an hour of back and forth about this one thing that you weren't even interested in.
Right. And so here's the thing. Do you stop and ask, is it for me to do this for this person? Is it for me to do this for them? Or is it for me to do a search for them?
Is it for me to do this for me even?
Right. Yeah.
Is there something of value here
Or
for
is
me?
this for me to do this right now?
Right. Right.
So lots of layers there, right? So, all right, let's do our session because it's late. Dang. We got
Oh, it
off the
really
ball.
is. Yeah, we've gotten off on a lot of tangents.
Yes. So today's session we'll do oh, what did we do? What did we do last week on the manipulation thing? Being able to identify it, I think.
Yeah, that's typically where I start. So with this
Right,
one,
that's
it's more for me, is the adding in, not to judge it, to be able to tap into guidance.
To allow ourselves to get the clear guidance.
All aligned within our authenticity.
Yeah. And true transcendent navigation of the patterns and habits of manipulation that we have with ourselves and with others, and vice versa. How's that?
I like that.
All right, everybody. So let's sit back, take a deep breath, close our eyes. As we step out of separation back into wholeness and oneness, and we hold ourselves at the vibration where that is our truth, that is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. Wow, I did some weird realignment in my body because I had this gurgling and then this
Right.
weird something just went good all through my body. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that was good. That felt nice. And it
Right.
felt so much more easy and authentic. Like it was just like, oh, look, there's the core. There's just me.
Right. I felt the word that comes to my mind is like that core realignment. Like no longer needing to, it's like our energy's been diverted
Yeah.
and it's been realigned now to that. Yeah. I didn't want to come back. Really
No, I
didn't,
didn't
to be
either. And
honest.
I didn't either. I was like, oh, but I could sit in this really nicely for a while.
Yep.
So, anyway, thank you for joining us. As always, tell us in the comments, like afterward, how things are going for you. Go through this week and really stay cognizant of that within yourself and like listen to yourself in every situation, everything, interactions. Is this for me? Is this for me to do? Is this for me to be? Not should I, but is this for me to do or be right now?
Right.
And do your best to stay out of judgment and just to observe. And if you have an issue with that, come and do on our Wonderland site the forgiveness course, because that'll help you get to that place of acceptance. That's what that's all about. But yeah, and pass this on, please. Share, like and share.
Absolutely. Follow us. So you won't miss an episode.
Yeah, and share
And
with others. This is such a big,
we have podcasts. So if you want to take us along and listen to it that way.
Yep, you can always
subscribe to that.
Yep, and you can listen. Well, and this is the audio of this goes on to Podbean. So
right.
Find us livingascension.podbean.com and yeah, share away, because really it's time for all of us to do this together. Right. So
absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni
signing off with this week's Living Ascension. Have a great one.